Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 15th and tonight's movie is Vivarium. This is a 2019 horror movie starring Jesse Eisenberg and Imogen Poots, which is one of the more unfortunate last names I've ever heard. It's about this couple that's looking for a home and they visit this very strange neighborhood that's like perfectly symmetrical and everything looks the same. It's like how I imagine that planet ran by It in A Wrinkle in Time looked. Like everything just looks identical. It all looks like cheery, bright, idyllic suburbia. They decide not to move there, but they can't even leave. There's like an all roads lead to Rome phenomenon happening and they can't escape. And then they're just stuck there. And then they receive a whole baby in a box and it just says, raise this kid and you can get out of here. Vivarium is a term used to describe an enclosure to contain animals for observation, but it's not like a zoo enclosure or something like that. It's meant to leave the animals at their own devices and see what they would do if they were living in the wild. And the fact that this movie is called Vivarium pretty much tells me that this is like an ant farm, but for humans instead of ants. This movie feels like a wild card. It could be terrible, it could be amazing. I can't really get a beat on it. So the only way to know is to find out. I have found out, and my findings are this movie is good. Not great, but good. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. I really did like the two leads, Gemma and Tom. They worked well together, they had good chemistry, and both of them were very good actors. There's also some very impressive acting and directing work involving the kid that they're given so that they can be released according to the box it came in. One thing I didn't mention in yesterday's review of They Look Like People is that there were a lot of moments of not great dubbing, like audio looping, in that movie where it was very, very obvious that the words you were hearing were not coming out of the character on screen. The only reason why I bring that up is because in this movie, the child is, I can only assume, dubbed over by an adult. And I'm not 100% sure about it because if it was done so well. The, I guess, real estate agent that they met when leading them to the neighborhood, which is called Yonder, his name was Martin, and he was able to demonstrate a very impressive skill of impersonation. Like, Gemma said a sentence, and he was able to say it right back to her, almost exactly the same way that she did it, with a very similar voice. It was so bizarre, I don't even know if it was real or if it was, like, artificially enhanced in post. And the child, like, there's a time skip where you see the child from an infant to looking like 10 years old, even though only 98 days had passed. Even as a small child, this kid talks in an adult-sounding voice and is very skilled at mimicking his, I guess, surrogate parents' voices. He will also screech continuously like a pterodactyl until he gets what he wants, whether it be, I don't know, watching cartoons or a bowl of cereal. And as weird as the situation on its own is, being trapped in this, like, Mobius strip of a neighborhood with nobody else. They never see anybody else in this giant neighborhood of identical houses. This kid is the weirdest part of the entire movie. And at first, neither of the couple want anything to do with this bizarre demon child they've been forced to raise. But Gemma eventually does warm up to the kid slightly, and that is a point of contention between her and Tom. I think that my main issue I have with this movie is its pacing. The main setup of the story, they go to this neighborhood, they can't get out, they're given this baby, and they have to raise it if they want to be released. That's all out of the way within 30 minutes. This movie, like, really hits the ground running and puts you into the situation as quickly as it can without leaving out anything. Nothing was wasted. This might have been the most efficient setup I've ever seen in a horror movie. But once it gets started, and then there's a giant time skip, things slow down a lot. There really isn't much for the characters to do, and because of that, there isn't really much for the audience to see. Tom takes up building a hole in the front yard because, I mean, what else is he going to do? And Gemma tries to get to know the child a little bit more, but again, talking to this child is like talking to, like, a riddle elf in a fantasy story. You're not going to get anything out of this kid. Or at least not anything useful. The pacing made this movie feel a little uneven. And it also kind of felt like things were getting a little repetitive. Things did pick up at the end, and there was a strong conclusion to this story. I just feel like they could have added more in the middle to make the second part of this structure feel a little less empty. And looking back on it, Vivarium is a movie that very much showed you what you were going to get right away. Within 30 minutes, the movie showed you its entire hand. So it's very plot heavy at the beginning, and the rest of it is just character moments and visuals and vibes. And if that interests you, I've certainly seen worse examples. Obviously, when it comes to raising a bizarre, non-human child out of nowhere in this, absurdist horror movie, this reminds me a lot of Eraserhead, and I thought it was better than Eraserhead. So if you like the idea, I'd say check it out. I didn't think this movie was bad at all. Alright, now I want to talk about a few spoilers. I said a moment ago that this movie showed its entire hand within the first 30 minutes, and that's something I didn't realize until I looked at the plot summary on Wikipedia. I tend to do that after really weird movies like this, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. And the first thing that they showed in this movie was something called brood parasitism. It shows a cuckoo bird, leaving its young in another nest so that another, parent bird couple can raise their kids for them. And the reason why that made, something click in my head is I realized that's literally exactly what happened in this movie. Both Martin, the real estate agent, and the child that they take care of are part of this supernatural species that uses brood parasitism to raise its young. They invite a couple into the Yonder neighborhood, trap them there, leave them with a kid of their species, and then let the kid basically feed off of them until it matures. Both, metaphorically and kind of literally, because both of them just sort of drop dead of plot disease by the end of the movie. And it gives context as to why this movie is called Vivarium. I thought it was called that because they put these two characters in this sort of enclosed bubble and just sort of leaving them there to fend for themselves. But that's not really the case. The creatures aren't the ones watching. We as the audience are the ones watching these wild animals in this enclosed space. We are watching the parasitic upbringing and lifestyle of this bizarre supernatural species. And at the end of the movie, the child, all grown up, looking like in his 30s, I guess, is able to leave the neighborhood and go back to that real estate office. He takes the name tag from the first Martin, who is still there but now looks old, and that Martin just dies, and he disposes of that body, and then he sits down in the chair and a new couple comes in. So in a way, this is a horror movie structured almost like a nature documentary. Most of the horror in this movie comes with how they developed the child character and the way that I'm 99% sure they dubbed in that audio, or this kid is just a freaking prodigy, worked wonders to make him seem so creepy and unnatural. And that was well before he revealed the fact that he had these bloated, air sacs in his neck like a frog or a bird. Once again, I thought that the movie wasn't paced well. I thought that they could have gone back to the drawing board when it came to the overall structure. But at its core, the idea is decent and it's executed relatively well. And I do like the dramatic irony of the fact that the entire time Tom was digging the hole that eventually he and Gemma would be buried in. And that was foreshadowed by the fact that about 20 feet down in the hole, he found a body bag. The effects and visuals in this movie were kind of hit or miss. They took the backrooms approach of using CGI to copy and paste the same buildings over and over and over, and it worked pretty well for the neighborhood, but they had to make fake clouds and those didn't look real at all. They had a really good practical effect with the frog sacks on the kid's neck, but there was a point where Tom dropped a cigarette and there was this bizarre stop motion animation of the ground burning that I don't even know why they did that. But overall, this movie does have a certain style to it. I'd say that this is, once again, a good movie. I didn't think it was a great movie, but I thought it was good. And if the premise interests you, there's a lot in it I didn't talk about here, so I still think it might be worth a watch. Thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.